Hey, when everything is going great and totally under control, it's really easy for leaders to talk about principles and core values and to say things like integrity first or our amazing people are more important than the financial bottom line.
And while saying all these things might be very easy and fantastic, staying true to your stated core principles can be a challenge for leaders even in the best of times. When your stated principles stray from your actions, we call this the say-do gap. This gap ranges from simple oversight on a daily basis, no big deal, to a massive gulf between what leaders say and the kind of leadership they exercise. As an example, you ever seen someone, maybe a boss, who says, "Family's first and work-life balance is a priority," but then sends emails late at night or on weekends and expects immediate and detailed replies? You may have experienced the say-do gap. Tell you the truth, I kind of did this myself one time, and purely by accident. I was the chief of staff for a very large organization, and as a result, I'd have to come in on Sundays and kind of clean up my emails and my inbox just to figure out what had to be done, what I might have missed. And while I was doing that, I would send emails to the staff and say, "Hey, not for today, work on this tomorrow. I'm just trying to get this out of my email box and we can work on it later." And more than half of them, I'd say even most of them, would respond with the answer on Sunday. And I realized maybe they weren't believing me. Maybe they were just such good people that they wanted to get the answer complete and show me that they knew what they were talking about. And it made me realize that I had a little bit of a say-do gap. So what I did was I'd come in on Sundays and I'd have those emails and I'd be working through them and I would write them up, but I would put them in my draft folder. Monday morning, I'd come in and I'd launch all those emails out because everyone's expecting Monday to be a big crush anyways after the weekend. And we'd get right through with it, but then no one would feel the requirement to answer my question.
Yeah, here at North of Center, we define a crisis as a situation when unwanted change is forced on an organization from the outside in. And those are the times when someone will ask, "Hey, can you spare a square?" And you'll find yourself looking at your last role thinking, no, I don't have a square to spare. And it's going to be really hard to do the right thing.
We are leading from North of Center. Welcome. I'm BJ Fitzpatrick, and I'm joined by Cliff W. Gilmore. I think everybody knows the world is in the middle of a very large crisis right now. As principal leaders, you've probably prepared, and you're probably leading flawlessly from the very beginning. Okay, that's not really how things work. But today we're going to walk you through a short process that'll help you lead effectively and smooth out those bumps that you might experience as a leader in times of crisis.
Now, the good news is the fundamentals of effective leadership are the same during smooth sailing as they are when you're facing a situation best described as suck factor high. Now, here are 4 simple ways to help you stick to your principles and avoid creating a giant say-do gap that will undermine not only your credibility as a leader, but the trust of your people in you and the success of your organization during good times and bad. These 4 things are: define your principles, describe your principles, demonstrate your principles, and demand accountability. BJ, over to you.
So when your principles are put to the test and you want to pass that test, you have to know what they are. So define them. Of course, you can look at our communication-based leadership framework on our website and go through the principles we've listed out. But there's other possibilities too. Look up principles of servant leadership and principles of transformational leadership, and you'll find lots of great things that you can look at for your own leadership style. When you have an idea of the principles that are out there and those you espouse, it's time to write them down. Just thinking about them's good, but not good enough. Formalize your process.
Now, we teach from and we train to the communication-based leadership or CBL model, but the strength of that model is that it's a foundation on which anybody can build their own leadership style. CBL is not an answer, it's not a replacement, it's just a way to put communication at the center of what you do, and you can use our principles to build on, or you can sub in your own, or you can mix and match as you prefer. But once you have defined your principles, you need to describe them to your team members and your colleagues. Now, this is the say part of avoiding a say-do gap. You literally bring your people together and share your leadership philosophy with them. Tell them what you aspire to be as a leader and why your principles are important to the organization. Then we get to the do part.
Before we get to the do part, Cliff, I have a saying I use a lot of times when maybe someone's having an argument or maybe they're coming back with another point. And I've said this before. Does that sound as good out loud as it did in your head? You might find that things don't sound out as good out loud once you say them. I think we've all been through that. We recommend you practice before you say them to your people. In front of a mirror, record it, listen to it, or find that person in your life who's going to give you that raw feedback to make it better. I know in my life, that's my wife. She's going to give me something great, and it's going to make what I do better because she listened to it as a kind of a disinterested third party and told me what I thought I was saying might not have been what I was saying. So that's just a recommendation, is practice this. So now I'll get to the do part. That's demonstrating your principles. Print them. Keep a copy in your pocket if you have to. Refer to them often and use them as a guide every time you make a decision. Now, if you make a mistake, review your principles and see where you might have fallen off. It's not a perfect process. Mistakes will happen. Getting yourself back on track as soon as possible is the key to long-term success. On the other hand, if you take the time to go through the first two steps of the process and then stick your work and your words in a drawer, you're going to find yourself lacking in execution all the time because your cornerstone, you've kind of thrown it away and gone on building a house without a cornerstone.
So you need to define your principles. I mean, the bottom line is if you don't know what your principles are, you can't possibly put them into practice. Once you've defined them, you need to describe those principles to the other people around you, whether they're your subordinates. You can describe them up the chain to your boss, across to other team members and colleagues. And then you need to demonstrate those principles, literally put your principles into play, make sure that you're saying the right things and doing the right things and you're consistent and those things are aligned. And then we get to the final piece, demand accountability. Now, what I'm driving at is demand that your people hold you accountable. And usually when I say this as a leader, people initially think that I mean that they need to make sure their own people are doing the right thing, following their values, doing what they're told based on the principles that they've laid out for their team. But this thing is hard. As a leader, you're going to be asking people to tell the emperor when they're wearing no clothes. And if you fail here, you will become a say-do gap leader. I taught public affairs for a time, and when I was teaching those courses, I got myself added onto a list of interview subjects for a bunch of the journalism students who were working through feature story writing exercises. One of the required questions for them from their schoolhouse was, how would you describe yourself? And I would put these folks back in their heels every single time when they'd ask, and I'd say, well, I don't describe myself, but what I will do is describe what I aspire to be. I'll explain my principles and say, this is what I'm trying to be. This is who I'm trying to be. This is how I'm trying to be. And then I will ask my own followers and my colleagues and my boss to hold me accountable to those principles. So you need to open the door to them and be willing to say, hey, talk to me. Let me know what I'm doing, whether I'm doing it right or wrong. And if you see me creating a gap between what I say is important and I'm doing it in a different way, you need to call me out on it. And as BJ said, no leader is perfect. So just present your principles in terms of what you are aspiring to do your best to live them, and then invite and encourage your people to tell you when they see that you or your organization are veering off course. Challenge them to make sure the things you say and do are consistent and aligned with the principles that you've told them are essential to the success of your organization. They're going to talk about you anyway. So just make sure they're comfortable talking about these things with you.
And that's it. 4 simple things you can do as a leader to make sure your principles stand up under pressure. To reiterate, define them, describe them to your team, demonstrate them through your daily practice, and demand your people hold you accountable for making decisions consistent with your principles. Now,
Hey,
Cliff and I are. I'm sorry.
Where are we at? Go for it. That's a good Bumble.
Yeah. Cliff and I are interested in keeping it short, hitting you hard, letting you come in, learn something, and then get on with your day. So what we're going to move into now is the question and response before we go into the closing, in case anybody has any questions. Cliff and I have a lot of experience here. We've seen it. We might even have done it accidentally or so on occasion, and we're happy to give you the benefit of our experience if you have any questions.
Hey, I see a question rolling on in from, well, actually, this is a plant. This is a plant in the audience. Chris Vicano, he's one of the strategic partners with North of Center. And he just dropped a note that said, are principles the same thing as values in a business context? I'm going to hedge on that one and say yes and no. The principles and values are very tightly put together. And in this context, you can certainly use them as synonyms. What we're talking about here is making sure that you know what we're saying core principles, but another worthwhile way to put that is just what are the values? What are the most important things to me as an organization, as a leader of an organization? Maybe your values are, family first. Maybe your values are customer first. Maybe your values are, and your principles are, hey, tenacity, never quit. You need to make sure that the principles and values that you choose are appropriate for both you and your organization. But yes, Chris, in this context, principles and values sort of an interchangeable thing. And then I'll keep talking for another brief moment to lay out why I use the term principles by default. And that's that I approach my principles, the principles of communication-based leadership, as practical tools that I can apply day to day and in real time, and almost a checklist, but more really of a guide to my decision making. In our case, we have the acronym FAT Cupids. That's free flow, accuracy, timeliness, credibility, unity, privacy. Unity, privacy, interaction, delegation, and then the sibilant S, safety/security. Those are the principles that I try to apply in my day-to-day life as a leader. It's not the whole list. I have some values that I hold very dear that I also apply in my day-to-day life. But when I move forward as a leader, I start from that FAT Cupids acronym, and I deliberately apply that list as a guide for my decision-making along the way. I hope that answered your question. I don't see any others in the queue. We'll give it a couple of seconds.
Cliff, as Chris asked that question, you were answering it. On the negative side, I'm sitting there thinking the movie Wall Street. Think of the principles and values they had. Work hard, do everything you can. Money is the prime driver, power, influence. And so that led them to some places where their values were compromised. And next thing you know, people are going to jail. People are informing on people. And so, you end up in a bad situation. But I would say their principles and values, their principles were probably aligned with what they were doing, but they weren't good ones, and they paid the price.
True story. And generally speaking, folks, your principles and your values should be designed to keep you and your people out of jail. That's an important part of this.
Kind of goes without saying, right?
Yeah. But I'm going to go ahead and touch on something here, which comes up and arguably we're seeing it out there in the world quite often, more often than we might like, and that's toxic leadership. And I'm going to put a plug in for the communication-based leadership model here again, that it's a foundation on which you can build. So if you happen to be a toxic leader, or you happen to have one. Odds are, if you are one, you probably don't know it. You're in denial. You refuse to believe it. But if you're working for a toxic leader, you can still use the communication-based leadership framework as a foundation on which you can build in order to guide and try and shape your colleagues and your subordinates inside your organization under the leadership of someone who is toxic. A final note on this when it comes to speaking of toxic. Interesting note for me as an egghead in the leadership side of life. There's one school of theory about leadership that's values-based, and the values-based theories and models of leadership are designed to help leaders be better, generally designed to help leaders uplift others, and get the most out of them and build them together towards a common cause. Toxic leadership theories, whether you're talking about dark leadership, narcissistic leadership, any of those things, those theories are designed to help you survive and thrive in spite of a toxic leader. That's an important thing. If you want to grow and learn as a leader, go seek out the values-based leadership philosophies and ideas. Greenleaf's servant leadership model comes to mind. Jim Burns and his transformational leadership models come to mind. Communication-based leadership is a values-based, a principles-based approach to leadership. Draw from those. If you happen to be working for an extremely toxic leader, go search principles of toxic leadership or characteristics of toxic leadership. Look those up, and you'll find a really excellent checklist of things that you need to figure out how to adapt and deal with using your other values-based leadership skills. BJ, anything else on your mind as I got rambling there?
You know, Cliff, I had a toxic leader, and this leader was a level up from where I was, and my leader actually did that and provided a lot of strength, a lot of it just really helped me deal with that, because my leader was so above that we were able to do some good quality principled work, despite the fact that we both experienced that toxic leader above us.
You know what? You're talking there about a thing that I used to say, or well, still do. And you mentioned a while back, there's something I say all the time. One of the things that I say to my own folks quite frequently is my job as a leader is to share the credit and take the caning. Now that's a stark sort of phrase. But what I'm getting at there is what you were describing there. If you are a values-based leader, even when you're in a situation working under a toxic leader, you can still lead effectively. You can still, develop and uplift and get the most out of your own people, even in that awful environment. And there may come a time when you just need to go. But you can still lead effectively by focusing in on your core principles. If you define them, you describe them, you communicate them to the rest of your crew, and then you demand that they hold you accountable to those principles. I'm going to go ahead here and bridge into calling it a wrap. As always, thanks for investing your time with us here at North of Center. If you enjoyed this discussion, found it valuable at all, please keep tuning in and spread the word about us. We go live noon Pacific every Wednesday and Friday. We will for the foreseeable future. And if you're not able to make that time, just be sure to look for these videos on our Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube channel. And they're going to all go live up on our website here sometime shortly as well. You'll be able to find them under the resources tab.
We also invite you, as usual, to visit our website at www.northofcenter.com. And you'll find that growing list of resources that Cliff was talking about, from videos to our podcast, our blog, and other downloadable tools.
So if we can be of any help to you in your effort to be the kind of leader you would want to follow, or frankly, even the kind of follower you would want to lead, please don't hesitate to reach out to us directly. We are all leaders in our own way, and leadership isn't just about position and authority. Leadership is a lifestyle. And at times like this in particular, we are all being challenged to lead, even at home within our own families. So thanks again for taking your time with us. All the best from Knox team to yours. And we'll see you out there. Thanks very much for joining us.
See you guys.